Okay, first, thank you very much for hosting today's session, and thank you very much, everybody who's taken the trouble and effort to come and listen today. Obviously, this is a presentation about grammar, particularly the types of problems that arise that I've seen many, many times when teachers try to construct lessons primarily around the notion of teaching a grammar point. And what I'm going to do today is offer you several examples as to why this very often doesn't work. Now, normally I do this as a seminar teaching, and usually the participants interact with one another and then interact with me. However, that's not really possible by Zoom. So I'm going to give you a lot of illustrations and rules and principles for about 35 minutes. And then after that, I'll take your questions and comments and so forth. Now, very few teachers start with the idea that they're going to teach a grammatical curriculum. Very few teachers these days do that. However, a surprising number of teachers do actually try to make grammar lessons. And what informs my presentation here today is not my current job, where I teach medical students at a university, but rather another job that I have, which is a intensive course at another university where I teach in the master's program, a TEFL master's program. And the class that I teach there is a teaching practicum. And what the students are required to do in this class is to first give a lesson plan to me and to share it with the other participants, and also to perform a mock lesson with the other students, a 45-minute lesson. So before this, I meet with each student and I ask to see their lesson plans, and I often get something like this. Ouch. As soon as I see that, a red flag goes up. And however, sometimes I'm surprised, and these types of lessons can be okay, can be meaningful. But generally, I ask the student at this point, well, why are you deciding to teach a grammar point? And this often surprises them. Many of the participants respond with, well, isn't that what we have to do? Isn't grammar the basis of language? And I have to impart the fact that no, it isn't. Really, grammar is only one description of a language. There are many others. There's lexical description, pragmatic, interpersonal, sociocultural, and so on. Grammar is only one of these. And moreover, grammar is the type of thing that often makes sense only after you've mastered it. And then you can look back and make sense of it. It's a little bit like swimming, for example. If you try to understand how every muscle is supposed to move before you learn how to swim, you probably won't be able to swim. It's only after you get some competency in swimming that you can understand how to be a better swimmer. So the idea that grammar has to be taught through the building block process is very, very questionable. Another problem that I immediately sense with these students, and by the way, these students that I'm talking about are often in-service teachers who are upgrading their qualifications, or they are graduate students who will be entering service soon. They often want to include a grammatical explanation inside their presentation. And this is often extremely problematic. They tell me, well, we have to explain the grammar to the students or else they won't understand it. Well, Probably you've noticed this yourself. Often the grammatical explanations are presented at a level of English that is much more difficult than the actual grammatical point that they're trying to teach. So people become simply more confused by explicit explanations of grammar. Not only that, but native English speaking English teachers often fail to have a formalized, deeper understanding of English grammar and Japanese grammar. In terms of English grammar, often, of course, they've absorbed English naturally, and they're unable, in many cases, or perhaps unaware of some of the subtleties. Japanese teachers, on the other hand, have a formal understanding of English grammar, but often fail to understand perhaps what's normative in English in various contexts. So starting from a grammatical perspective, teachers are already at a disadvantage because often this means they'll fail to adequately anticipate, address, or understand the struggles of local students. This is especially true for native English-speaking teachers. Now, my interest in this particular topic started many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, when a student after class came up to me and asked the question that you see here, which is correct. I've been to France, or I went to France. Well, think about that for a second. Well, actually, there's nothing wrong with the construction of either sentence. The internal grammatical construction is not a problem here. Whether we say that sentence is correct or incorrect is going to depend upon whether the speaker wants to talk about simply the fact of having gone to France, or they want to add something to the experience like when or why and so forth, in which case the second one would be more appropriate. It's similar to this question: how long have you lived in Japan versus how long did you live in Japan? Which one is correct? Well, that depends entirely on the position of the person who's being asked the question. If they are still in Japan, if that's the context, then the first one is correct. If they are no longer in Japan, then the second one is correct. So just from these very simple samples, we can, a principle emerges, and that is context and content suggest grammatical forms, not the other way around. So we make our choices based upon content and context first. Those are actual priorities. Let me give you several more examples in order to instill this point. Here's a Japanese phrase that every foreigner, I think, who's been in Japan for more than 10 minutes knows: shikataganai, sometimes reduced to shogunai. Well, think a second. Why do all foreigners learn this particular phrase so quickly? Well, they certainly don't learn it through the grammar. Nobody teaches them that nai is the short form of arimasen. Nobody teaches them that wa and ga are different here, and we should use ga. Nobody teaches them that this noun phrase at the beginning, shikata, is rather unusual in Japanese, and explaining the basis for that. No, what we do to learn this phrase, which includes the grammatical points inside, is we hear it being used and we start to associate it with a certain mood, a certain feeling, a certain atmosphere. This one. As a result, we become able to use the phrase. So, a principle again emerges. Set phrases should be learned as single vocabulary items, and they are best learned when they are associated with feelings and situations. We don't learn them as abstract grammatical constructions. Another problem, and again, this is something that I observed with the young teachers that I'm doing teacher training with. Sometimes they would force grammar unnaturally into the materials they're using or into the activities. There are a lot of problems with this. I'd like to show you some. First, the idea of forcing students to use full grammatical forms can be really awkward in the real world, including the most basic form of all. What's your name? My name is. You know, sometimes I've been in a position in class where I've forgotten a student's name and I want to quickly go ahead with what I'm saying. And so I ask, oh, what's your name? And the student starts off with it, my name is. And it's not a major problem. It's just slightly annoying because my name is Taro Watanabe, for example, is an opening line. It's not a response. So for example, if you're going out to dinner and you have a reservation, you go up to the front of the restaurant and you might say, my name's Taro Watanabe, I have a reservation tonight. So it's the opening line. It's not a natural response line. The my name is business is redundant. It's just grammatical noise. But okay, this one's not so important. So let me give you one that could really be problematic. Imagine the doctor here is doing very delicate brain surgery, and the doctor says, nurse, what's his temperature? And the nurse responds with, his temperature is 36.7 degrees. The doctor's thinking, well, just give me the information. We're not here for a grammar lesson. So the idea is in these types of exchanges that the grammatical element can be eliminated. So this leads them to using a lot of unnecessary grammatical baggage, and it makes them become more unnatural and often awkward in their speech. Now, probably you've noticed a lot of Japanese students struggling to start when speaking English. Now, this is natural for learners of any language. How to begin a phrase is rather difficult. But why in particular does it happen with Japanese students where they want to speak and they get all caught up in that first word? I think the answer is they're thinking about what is the correct grammatical subject of this sentence, rather than focusing on whatever it is that they want to convey, the content. Here's an example. So in Japanese, Sari raishu doku ni iku yotei desu ka? And I have the literal translation here. So this is what the Japanese student is thinking. So now they're looking for a grammatical subject. Now, Sally isn't really a grammatical subject here, but it comes first. Now, it might be confusing for them because they're thinking, I have to put the grammatical subject first. But in fact, look at this. Whoa, so many things can be put in the initial position. And they are not, in many cases, grammatical subjects. They are topics or heads. And once you establish the head or choose a head, this gives orientation to both the speaker and the listener. After that, the rest of the communication can fall much more naturally into place. But as you can see, it's very, very flexible. So head of a sentence or a topic, not a grammatical subject, these are very flexible and these help to orient. So instead of having students look for the correct grammatical subject, the speaker can start simply by choosing the head. It would be good if we could help students to make this choice rather than going through all these grammatical exercises before they speak. Another problem that I'd like to address. A lot of teachers in the teacher training courses that I've done in the past, a lot of teachers I know have done a lesson about the difference between will and going to. This could be called a vocabulary or lexical difference. It's also a slightly grammatical because teachers are trying to teach the future. Well, there's a big problem in a case like this too. Here's why. Frankly speaking, will and going to could be used alternately without any change in meaning about 95% of the time. The differences aren't really meaningful. There are a few small cases where, for example, going to would be used for planned actions about to begin. So yeah, I'm going to go get the pizzas now. Or will for resolute decisions. You know, I will marry her. I will do it. Something like that. But these are very, very minor cases. This raises the question, well, why would we be teaching something like this, which in fact is a very, for the most part, meaning the same thing. Not only that, but after hearing about teachers teaching will versus going to, I actually asked 4 different foreigners in Japan this question: what are you going to do this weekend? And I wanted to see what their answers would be. Would they use will or would they use going to? And here were the 4 responses. Oh, no will, no going to. It seems like the language might be forced into the lesson. People aren't always or even often using these forms. So making students think that they have to use these forms and there are all these subtleties about the different ways of using them doesn't appear to be the case. Again, it's very, very flexible. People are not using will or going to all the time. So instead of focusing on the grammar point, why not do this? Let's make it a content lesson. Future plans. Then we don't get tripped up by these grammatical issues. And yet the students are still discussing and using the content. So there's a rule here. Often the target forms that we expect to appear don't appear. And another problem is that many of these are not as common or as basic as we believe them to be. Here's an example: the present simple. This is usually taught very, very early on in their learning careers. But is it really so simple? Well, first we might ask a question. Well, when or why do we actually use the present simple? People think, well, it's present and it's simple, therefore it must be easier and it must be the most basic form. Well, really? Well, we often see examples like this. And I really dislike such examples because I don't even know what this means. Josh plays soccer. In order to make this actually meaningful, one has to put the content into some kind of adjunct phrase for example, to describe habits. Here we are. I eat lunch in the cafeteria. I wake up at 6 a.m. on school days. So now we have some kind of context. In order to teach the present simple, it really is important then to add some kind of location or temporal feature or something like that. However, still, think about this. These constructions are really not that common in daily speech. We don't often use this type of English. Not only that, our daily habits are not nearly so static that we can say, I do X every day. So maybe, again, we should focus on simple, a grammatical point. Let's change it. Content of our habits or our regular habits. Wouldn't that be a better focus? And again, allowing for greater flexibility. Now, related to this, Here's a very common error. You've probably seen this before. I like to sing a song, okay? And you've probably fixed this by saying, this is better. I like to sing songs. However, if we go a step further, it should probably be, I like to sing, because nobody sings the phone book or nobody sings a menu or an invitation. Obviously, it's songs. But anyway, the point here is, okay, the student has made a mistake and perhaps the teacher fixes this, and then maybe the student should understand the principle behind the grammar point. You've probably done this before, I think. So maybe you say something like, well, if it's sing a song, it's only one song. So it sounds like you're singing the same song every time. And if it sings songs, that means in general. Okay, so now you've told students the underlying point. But then this happens. Oh no. A woman can fix a car just as well as a man. So now that principle, that grammatical principle that you just told students, falls apart very, very quickly, because we soon come across constructions like these, where now it's again. Is it an individual woman? No, we're talking about women in general. Is it one car? No, we're talking about cars. So our grammatical principle here is suddenly falling apart with counterexamples. And it's a fact that the principles behind grammar can be very, very complex indeed, and often they're inconsistent. A good example is like, where do you come from? You think about it, this is very strange, because do, being in the present tense, should refer to something habitual, something regular that you do many times. Of course, we don't come from our country many times. Why isn't this in the past tense in English? Because already we have arrived in Japan, presumably, and we've been in Japan a while. Why do we use this? So again, this is going to be very confusing for students. The principles are not really consistent. And this problem increases when teachers try to explain the rules. Instead, I would say the rules are best absorbed, and best absorbed when they are contained within meaningful content-based associations. Let me give you an example of this. And this is a case of a 5-year-old. This is a true story. A 5-year-old who can understand the past perfect, the notoriously difficult past perfect tense. How can this happen? Well, the answer is Curious George. If you read an English Curious George story many times to a small child, you'll notice that in Curious George, there's a certain pattern to the story that anybody can quickly pick up. Here's the pattern. George is curious. He finds something fun to do. His curiosity leads to trouble. Then he regrets, keyword, what he did before, and ultimately he fixes it. Okay, this pattern is repeated again and again. And the young child starts to associate the words, for example, he had forgotten. It had started out so nicely. He tried to help, but they start to associate this with some kind of regret or some kind of trouble based on what George did before. They're not conscious of any grammar per se here. However, they are beginning to associate a grammatical pattern in English with a certain feeling or a certain theme in the story. So gradually, even a 5-year-old can slowly, gradually come to understand something like the past perfect. Now, here's another example. The perfect tense. This one does come from my current teaching situation. And this is an example from a textbook that I use. And the conversation here is the first history taking, so the first interview, checking for symptoms and things, between a doctor and a patient. And the students are not focusing upon grammar. I don't have them focus upon grammar here, but please look at the yellow items in each sentence. You'll notice the perfect tense appears in all of them. What happens? Gradually, students come to understand that when they are talking about something like symptoms that started a while ago and are still present, that requires the use of have or has. So my students are interested in medicine. This is meaningful for them. So they start to make a deeper association between the grammar form and the actual content of taking a history. Gradually noticing more and more these relationships, and much more so when these are associated with content. I'm going to shift gears here. Sometimes people say that we should teach grammar because obviously there's very different, Japanese and English grammar are extremely different. But many of these things that look like grammatical differences are actually what are known as ideational or concept differences when you go from one language to another, and they're not really grammatical problems. I'll give you some examples. Okay, the active to the passive, okay? I'm sure you've all dealt with this in your classrooms before. Now, if we think of active-passive grammar just as a mechanism, it appears quite easy, right? So the police caught the suspect was caught by the police. It's pretty easy, but there's a bigger problem here. This alone is not going to help our students to understand how to use active versus passive in English. Here's the problem. The big problem is when and why do we choose the passive voice? Because the Japanese passive is not chosen at the same times that the English is, and the English active does not match the Japanese active always. Well, maybe as teachers, we can give some examples to help our students. Fair enough. Here are two examples when the recipient needs to be emphasized, and there's an example, or when the agent or subject is not important or is unclear. Okay, so here are two examples. We could tell our students something like this, or give them some examples as to when one makes the grammatical choice in English. But then we get this. And this is very common in non-Western languages. So the Japanese construction here, watashi wa tsuma ni shinareta. And literally, my wife was died. Well, we would probably look at our students who say this, and I bet you've heard that, was died. And you might say, well, no, that's not passive. One actively dies, right? It's not a passive situation. But in Japanese, it's in the passive, because the way this is oriented to the Japanese speaker is that something troubling happened to them, and they are the speaker now. So that's why they choose the passive. So just telling them that, well, no, use the active, and here's how you use the active, isn't enough. It's an ideational problem. And between the two languages, ideation is not always consistent with grammar. There are lots of common examples. Wakarimashita. Look, in Japanese here, wakarimashita is in the past tense. But in English, we don't say I understood, usually. We say I understand or I see. In Japanese, the idea is that this was said or conveyed a moment ago, therefore it's already in the past. English sees it as a state. So just telling students, well, use the simple present simple for I understand, doesn't work. Then look at this. Suddenly we've got something that's the exact same meaning, so semantically exact, but it's in the past tense. Got it. Students are going to be really confused here. Another example, yokatta. Now, this can, on occasion, translate to that was good in English, but it also translates to that's good or just Good. Again, Japanese views yokata as something that took place in the immediate past, and therefore it's put in the past tense, whereas in English, we're often thinking that it's still in the current situation, so we put it in the present. So again, these are different ideas, and knowing grammar here is not particularly going to help. Another well-known one for I know in Japanese is shiteru. So Japanese puts it in the continuous form because in Japanese, knowing is seen as a continuous item. And in English, I know is seen as just at the present, referring to what the speaker has just said. So there are so many examples that I could put up here. Two of my favorites here for just a few more examples. Wasurete shimatta. So Japanese will be thinking wasurete shimatta. Now they know wasure is forget, and now they're thinking, my goodness, how do I say shimatta in English? This is grammatically constructed in Japanese. So in Japanese, the feeling of, oh no, is included grammatically, but it's not in English. There's no grammar construction in English. Shitekida, same thing. The movement behind it does not exist in English grammar, but it's constructed in Japanese grammatically. So if we focus upon grammar, and here's how you go from Japanese grammar to English grammar, students are going to be very confused with these types of items. Okay, again, these are ideational, not grammatical issues. A final example of this, Japan is a safety country. You've probably heard this many, many times. Well, is there a rule to help learners fix this problem? Yeah, probably you've done something like this before. Okay, safe is an adjective, safety is a noun. Maybe you give them some examples like I've done here. Okay, however, do you think they'll have it now? Adjective, noun, there's a difference. This might still not help Japanese students. Do you know why, despite the grammar? Because in Japanese, the difference between an adjective and a noun is not really clear at all. They are mixed a lot. So just telling students that adjective works this way, noun works this way, doesn't quite work. Now, some people have said to me, okay, superlatives though. Superlatives are easy to teach, and maybe they can work as grammar. Okay, fair enough. So what is the main rule of superlative use? Okay, and many teachers might say, well, this is the main rule. Perhaps most of you agree with me, and I think it might be fair to say. Now, what kind of problems, especially non-Western students, might have with this rule? What do you think? Don't answer me, but think about it. Well, the problem is syllables. The idea of a syllable is not the same between English and many other languages, particularly non-Western languages. So Japanese students don't have a clear idea of what a syllable is in English. Moreover, there are a lot of exceptions to the main rule. Now, okay, maybe we can teach them, but look, there are quite a few. Best, worst. Adjectives that end in Y, busy, busiest. Some two-syllable adjectives don't follow the rule. Quiet, quietest, and so forth. And then there's more. Are there any other notable features that we should teach? Well, yeah, here's one. Opposite of most equals least. But now, even more. So we think we're teaching students the superlative. Here's something else. What is the typical surrounding text? This is very important for communication. Notice this, when we are using the superlative, we almost always use the definite article, the, and we always include some kind of context in the class, in the tri-state area. So now we're moving away from grammar and rather into contexts and content. And the students can learn how to use the superlative much better if their lesson is about number ones and not about teaching the superlative. Content focus first. So grammar's problematic, yes, but is there a recommended time, way, and place to introduce grammar into the classroom? And I think there is a place for it, not at the beginning of the lesson. I think of quick fix, pit stop style grammar fixes. So in the middle of a lesson within some wider content or topic area, quickly, precisely, concisely, with clear examples, you can make a quick grammatical example or a very quick grammatical point to just fix or steer people in the right direction. This is where grammar teaching can come in, but it's brief. However, even then, we can't expect that because we taught the students the past tense that they're suddenly going to know or understand how it works. Acquiring grammatical skill requires constantly checking, confirming, and correcting one's communicative hypotheses. Every time a student speaks, they're making a hypothesis that is, they'll be checking and confirming. Moreover, students often have to come to grasp with these grammatical rules by themselves. And the way that they can do that best is if the teacher focuses upon content first. That's the best foundation in which internalizing grammar can occur. Thank you, everybody. Now, if there are any questions, I'll close my presentation and then take any questions.
Hey everyone, if you have a question, you can type it in chat, or you can simply turn on your microphones and ask away. Or if you would like, you can use the reactions button. Click on it and you will see there the raise hand button.
Michael Siantar, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, has made a few comments on the chat. It'd be difficult for me to respond to all of them. One that I see says, Wakari Mashta is a set phrase. It might be better to treat it that way. It's also, well, it's a grammatical phrase. It's a verb with the in the past tense. But if I'm going to, okay. Where do you come from is not really not good English. I'm not sure why you would say that. Michael, if you want to come in here and say, where do you come from? I think it's quite standard when you're talking about somebody's country of origin.
We have one here from James who said,
Oh,
do you
okay.
know a good book that breaks down what you said in your presentation today?
One more time, please. Sorry.
Do you know a good book that breaks down what you said in your presentation today?
Actually, I can't come up with one immediately. However, this might not be as helpful as I'd like, but if you simply Google some of the points that I've made today, then you might find that there's a lot of support for a number of them. So, and then regarding the flexibility as to how we construct English and that it doesn't always follow certain set grammatical rules, 2000s, Ronald Carter and Michael McCarthy wrote a lot about the grammar of speech. And they looked at a lot of actual impromptu speech, and they came up with a lot of interesting findings. So if you're really interested in what people actually say and how they construct it and how they manage these situations without using formalized grammar, then Michael McCarthy or Ronald Carter's work might be helpful.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. James, any other questions?
Yeah, hi. I've got
There-
a question, or actually like a bit of a comment. Let me just turn my camera on. It's not turning on. Oh, there I am. When it comes to grammar teaching, I think that it really depends who your target students are. Like if you're doing a communicative class, it really wouldn't be ideal to explain grammar function or structure. Like you really have to demonstrate. But if you're going to be teaching like writing classes and all that, then you really would have to explain how a sentence is structured. So I think because I'm a TESOL trainer by trade, I always tell my trainee teachers that you have to sort of, know who you're teaching, because you can't be doing the same way to your students, especially like, if you're a non-native English teacher, this is actually an advantage because, you've studied English, so you know the struggles of your students. But say if you're a native English speaker and trying to explain English grammar, now this is going to be pretty difficult. But anyway, my main point is like, I think you really have to know who your students are first. Are you teaching communicative English or reading and writing?
Right. Well, even I think reading and writing, for example, writing some type of composition, if we start again with content and think about what students are trying to communicate, then again, that focus, that initial focus, that priority will in turn suggest certain grammar forms that are better than other grammar forms. So once we establish what is the purpose of our writing, what are we trying to communicate, it's only after that that we can start to do these pit stop type of grammatical explanations. Let me give you a quick example with my first year students at medical school here. In the first class, I get them to interview one another, and then in the next class, they have to write about their partner and try to make their partner interesting and to help us to get them let us know who their partner is. A lot of them, unfortunately, they focus so much on making correct grammatical sentences, and they end up choosing things that are entirely uninteresting or unimportant and not really organized well. So I always tell them, first, I want you to think about what's most important about that person and also what's going to be interesting for the reader. Why are you telling me these things about other students in the classroom? It's only after they make these choices that we can then focus upon the grammatical elements and say, okay, if you want to express this, perhaps this is better. Without going into great detail about the underlying grammatical structure. End quote.
Right. Thank you, Michael. We have it seems Michael Shantar is back. Michael, do you have any question, or would you? I mean, the other Michael. Our speaker is Michael, and we also have a participant here, Michael Shantar. Michael, would you like to make your comment to Michael Shantar regarding his remarks earlier, or that's okay? And I think he's gone again. He's still here.
Okay, Mary raised a hand. Okay.
Yes, Mary, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So just like what I typed in a while ago, I go to one school, and this is a secondary school. Probably either go to university or Tokyo University after their graduation. So tomorrow I'm going to start with the activity, and then they really focus on English expressions or communications. So my question is this: what else can we give them as an activity in terms of English expressions or communication? Because for tomorrow, I just thought of like using the picture to bring out the grammar, and the focus is just like gerund or verb plus ing as a noun, like sitting under the tree or dancing to the music. So any suggestions other
Almost
than that?
always, I would say, what is the wider context in which this language is presented? What is the purpose? So somebody either wrote it or is reading it. And it only really can make sense to students at a micro level, that is the grammatical details, if they understand what the macro purpose is. So without a clear picture of what the purpose of this particular choice of language is, I think it's really hard for students to internalize the detailed points. Like when would we choose something like sitting as opposed to some other grammatical form? So I would strongly suggest, I'd have to see your lesson in order to make a good comment about it, but I would really strongly suggest that that purpose of communication is set first. Where does this language come from? What was it a part of? What is it trying to convey? Who are the interactants? Who is the target reader or listener of this? And once students are familiar with all that, it can more easily be packaged into a place where they say, okay, now I understand how that particular microstructure fits in or works.
And we have one more question here in chat. It says here, would this change if the context was writing grammar?
Well, yeah, writing grammar isn't so much a context, I believe. That's an activity. But again, the activity of writing grammar, it seems to be a bit of a paradox to me, because if you're writing something, presumably you're writing for some purpose towards some end. Otherwise, you're just basically writing words or letters. You're not really writing anything with a purpose. So I think if we want students, we do all want students to understand the internal structure and to use it correctly, but this is less likely to happen unless we have a clear idea as to what the communicative purpose is. So if the activity is writing an invitation, there are certain structures that lend themselves to that. If it's writing a resume, then something else. If it's just writing an email to a friend, there are again certain structures which are more likely to occur, and then we can help students notice these things. So grammar is still being addressed. It's just not from the starting point. The starting point is something else.